Mechanical malfunction, a wayward torpedo, and getting run down by a cargo ship? Not all subs made it out of World War II intact, and some suffered truly bizarre fates. The book U.S. Submarines 1941 to 1943 by Jim Chrisley states that the USS Capelin and its crew of 78 men were lost at sea on December 1, 1943, but the truth is considerably more complicated. In fact, the story of this particular submarine shows just how mysterious the fates of these vessels could be during wartime, even when people were roughly aware of the area the sub was supposed to patrol. The details of the Capelin's final days are murky, to say the least. Per the Navy Department Library, the submarine arrived in Darwin, Australia on November 16th after its very first patrol mission, during which it sank 2 Japanese merchant freighters. It departed for its second patrol on November 17th after some repairs. This was the last conclusive sighting of the boat, and the only somewhat confirmed information of its disappearance is that it happened somewhere in the western Pacific Ocean around the Celebes or Molucca Sea. Around the time of the Capelin's disappearance, there were unverified and inconclusive reports of an unrecognized American submarine under attack by Japanese forces, and another submarine reported a potential sighting on December 2nd. Still, as Michael Sturma's book The USS Flyer, Death and Survival on a World War II Submarine notes, the common belief appears to be that the sub succumbed to naval mines that were abundant in the area. Some disappearances have little to no drama that can be perceived by an outside observer, but that doesn't mean that they don't have mysteries to spare. Take the USS Amberjack, a US Navy submarine that served on the Pacific Front during World War II. Using Brisbane, Australia as its port, the Amberjack achieved some notable victories during its third and final patrol, which started on January 26, 1943. It sank at least 2 ships, one of which was carrying explosives. It also reported an encounter with enemy ships and destroyers, and even managed to take a prisoner. However, that's all we know for sure. All the Navy can be certain about is that the Amberjack disappeared, taking all but one of its crew of over 70 men with it. Interestingly, the one man who we know didn't disappear lives on in Navy tradition. Before the submarine was lost, its chief pharmacist mate Arthur C. Beeman was confirmed to have died during a mission on February 4th, and a recreation center at Pearl Harbor Submarine Base bears his name. There is a possibility that the submarine was destroyed during a depth charge attack by enemy vessels on February 16th, but there's little concrete evidence about this. The attack may also have been on another submarine called the Grampus, or both of them, or perhaps something completely different happened to the Amberjack. Of course, not every submarine that became lost during World War II was an American one. According to Cristiano Diadamo of the Regia Marina Italiana website, one of the Royal Italian Navy's more infamous submarines was the Marcello-class vessel Barbarigo. It is known for its numerous successful missions, along with some rather inaccurate claims, courtesy of one of its commanding officers, Enzo Grossi. Per Paul Ackerman's book, Encyclopedia of British Submarines 1901 to 1955, Grossi claimed that in May 1942, the Barbarigo had managed to sink a massive 33,000-ton California or Maryland-class battleship. In October of that year, he reported the same outcome for a smaller but still impressive Mississippi-class vessel. The second sinking was later confirmed as a massively embellished encounter with a much smaller British Flower-class corvette ship that Barbarigo didn't even manage to sink. As for the first one, the crew may have genuinely been under the impression that the attack was a success, but it later transpired that the American ship in question not only didn't sink, but hadn't even noticed the Italian submarine trying to attack it. Grossi's tenure notwithstanding, Barbarigo served well on numerous missions, but it didn't survive the war. Converted into a trade submarine, it disappeared off the coast of Bordeaux, France in June 1943. It is thought that the heavily loaded vessel sank due to enemy activity or simply broke down.
The memorial at Pearl Harbor reminds us that submariners never consider them lost.
3 fallen enemies and a main character disappearing might sound like something out of a spaghetti western, but according to the book United States Submarine Losses in World War II, this is also a pretty good description of the second and final patrol mission of the USS Kete. The submarine left its base in the western Pacific island of Guam on March 1, 1945, and while its first mission had been entirely drama-free, this one featured plenty of action. After sending in a weather report as part of its mission on March 20th, however, the Kete and its crew of 87 men were never heard from again. The sub sank no less than 3 freighters on the night of March 10th. This and an unsuccessful encounter with a 4th enemy ship left the submarine with precious few torpedoes, and it was on its way to Pearl Harbor to deal with the situation. Obviously, it never arrived at its destination, but there's little indication of what actually happened. The Navy's best guess is that a Japanese submarine managed to sink it, but there are no records to support this theory. It's possible the sub that attacked the Kete was also destroyed before it could report this, which could have left the Kete's fate outside official record keeping. Estonia may not be known as a major player in World War II, but that doesn't mean the country didn't have submarines at play. According to the Estonian Maritime Museum, the country's two British-built Kalev-class submarines, Kalev and Lembeat, were completed in 1936. Lembeat is actually still around, leading a quiet existence in the aforementioned museum. Kalev, on the other hand, was not quite as lucky. According to NATO's profile of Lembeat, the creation of these subs was unconventional as the people of Estonia effectively crowdfunded the project with scrap metal donations. However, Estonia didn't have a chance to enjoy its submarines for long. After the Soviet occupation of the Baltic states in 1940, the ship served as part of the Soviet Union's Navy presence in the area, according to U-Boat.net. Unfortunately, Kalev never returned from its second World War II mission. It's believed to have run into a mine in the Gulf of Finland in either October or November 1941. Details of the incident are somewhat scarce, but since Lembeat had a crew of 32, it's probably safe to assume that number was no bigger when it disappeared. Sometimes history can't quite decide whether the fate of a missing submarine is tragic or downright embarrassing, such as the case with the German-type 7-sea submarine U-972, which the Navy Department Library lists as lost to unknown causes somewhere in the North Atlantic area in January 1944. However, the true story behind the ship's sinking might be even stranger. The books Hitler's Navy, a reference guide to the Kriegsmarine 1935 to 1945, and The Submarine Has No Friends, friendly fire incidents involving U.S. submarines during World War II, both state that the U-boat was sunk by its own torpedo. Such an incident could have been possible with German T-5 acoustic torpedoes, which followed sound sources, but took a circular route when they detected the first sound.
Acoustic torpedoes are designed to home in on the noise of propellers, which are located at a ship's stern.
This was an effort to circumvent the fake sound sources known as Foxers that British ships often towed behind them. However, the torpedo could have potentially picked up the sound of U-972 and targeted the U-boat itself. Per Showell, another U-boat known as U-377 also succumbed to a similar fate. Regardless, U-972's fate remains officially unknown, and while lost for unknown reasons might seem less unfortunate than sunk by its own torpedo on paper, it's of little significance to the 49 people who disappeared with the submarine. The crew and captain of the Polish submarine Orzel didn't particularly care for Nazis, and when Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, they promptly relocated the vessel to Estonia. Fortunately, it wasn't any safer there, as the local authorities were too concerned by the Nazis to let the Orzel do its thing. Instead, they captured the crew and started removing the sub's weapons and operational equipment. The Estonians thought the sub's captain, Jan Grunge, was fine with this, which is exactly what he wanted them to think. In reality, he and his crew were busy staging a daring escape plan that involved hostages, a harbor-wide blackout, and a desperate reverse gear escape under artillery fire. This, however, was just the beginning. They then had to make it to the UK with no navigation equipment and waters that were full of German ships that wanted a word. It took 44 days of close calls and desperation maneuvers, but they ultimately managed to get there. The Orzel's heroic escape became an international news story, but unfortunately, the good times didn't last long. In June 1940, the submarine and its crew of 54 were reported to have disappeared during a patrol mission in the North Sea. The number 13 isn't exactly known to be lucky in most walks of life. In 1940, the Dutch submarine O-13 tragically demonstrated that naval warfare may not be exempt from this particular superstition. Following reports of increased German activity in the area between Norway and Denmark, O-13 left its base in Dundee, Scotland on June 12 for a patrol mission. Sadly, the submarine and its crew of 34 men never returned. Despite attempts to locate the vessel, it remains the only missing World War II-era Dutch submarine. There are many theories as to what happened. The most prevalent explanation is that it was blown up by a sea mine. Other theories include an encounter with an enemy it was patrolling and an accidental collision with a friendly submarine. Regardless of the reason, it happened mere months after escaping Germany's invasion of the Netherlands in May 1940. Though the submarine's time with the Royal Navy was cut extremely short, it played a supporting role in one of the biggest moments of the war, protecting the ships that carried out the Dunkirk evacuation. According to the Naval History and Heritage Command, the first submarine bearing the Swordfish title started its active war patrols immediately after the December 7, 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor. Incidentally, the Swordfish itself had been stationed in the ill-fated naval base, but it was in another location during the attack.
It was less than 6 weeks after Pearl Harbor, and the blow that struck us there was only the first of many attacks falling upon our allies and ourselves.
For the following 4 years, the Swordfish ran a total of 13 missions, performing important operations like high-profile evacuations, along with damaging and sinking enemy ships. That 13th mission, however, is where the Swordfish ran out of luck. On December 22, 1944, the submarine left Pearl Harbor to patrol the Nansei-Shoto island chain. Radio contact was lost after January 2, 1945, and its fate remains unknown. Per the Naval History and Heritage Command, the USS Trout was a highly decorated submarine that performed several massively successful and destructive patrols of the Pacific following the attack on Pearl Harbor. The submarine took on numerous ships and sank many of them. However, the Trout had several close calls. It had to dodge torpedoes and withstand horrifying depth charge bombings that sometimes shook the vessel so violently crew members were thrown around inside. The 84-strong crew of the Trout also found that torpedoes aren't always the most reliable weapon out there. Many of its torpedoes missed, and on more than one occasion, even direct hits wound up being duds. The Trout's 11th mission started on February 8, 1944, and proved to be its final one. The submarine was last seen refueling on February 16th and is thought to have disappeared somewhere in the vicinity of the East China Sea. The Navy suspects the Trout went down fighting since it was in an area where a submarine attacked a Japanese ship convoy on February 29th. But exactly what happened to the submarine in question, and whether it was the Trout in the first place, remains a matter of speculation.
I regret to say that the USS Trout was lost later in the war.
On the surface, the story of USS Grayling isn't too different from the many other tales of missing submarines. However, while the sub's loss remains a mystery, the Naval Department Library refers to Japanese reports that surfaced after World War II was over. These reports suggest that the Grayling might have suffered a truly peculiar fate. One of the subs actively operating in the Pacific after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Grayling started its patrols in January 1942. It sank 16 ships over the course of 8 missions before its disappearance sometime in late August or September 1943. This disappearance has been attributed to potential malfunctions or enemy attacks, but the aforementioned Japanese files have suggested something very different, that the Grayling was run over by a ship. Though the Navy's last communication with the Grayling happened on August 19th, the Japanese reports describe submarine activity in the Tabla Strait area, where it very well could have operated at the time. These sightings range from August 29th to September 9th, which according to the United States Navy Memorial is when a ship called Hokuan Maru came in. The Japanese ship spotted a barely submerged vessel in the shallow waters and promptly ran it over, reporting a clear impact. It's entirely possible that this marked the end of the Grayling and its crew of 53 men.